Well, I'm very excited about this week's episode of The Art of Complexity. This week, I'll be interviewing Glen and Nancy Ellis, who are entrepreneurs as a couple, and they've started several small businesses and companies in the Nebraska region. And I've gotten to know them over the last 18 months as we live in the same community. But I really thought this episode would be a unique one so that we could just really dive into complexity in a more community-based aspect, as Glen is a change agent really in the community that we live in. So join me and lean in as we tell their story in this episode of The Art of Complexity.
Welcome to the Art of Complexity podcast, where we explore how people and organizations understand and tackle the most complex challenges they face on a day-to-day basis. Simply put, how they think and act beyond. If you or your organization faces a challenge that seems to just be unsolvable, then you're in the right place. Now, here's your host, Roy Adams.
Well, welcome to this episode of The Art of Complexity. I'm privileged to be sitting down today with some friends of mine that I've gotten to know over the last 18 months or so here in their amazing space called Milady Coffee House. That's Glen and Nancy Ellis, who are a couple entrepreneurs and community activists and change agents, and we're just going to explore complexity with them today and their personal stories and the stories of what they've done throughout their life. I've really enjoyed getting to know both of you over this last 18 months as I've moved into this community of Fremont, and just it's been a pleasure to get to know you individually, but to just see how you've taken something as an idea and a vision and turned that into what we're sitting in right now, where a community of people is gathering in and just enjoying themselves and this great town we have here in Nebraska. So could you briefly just introduce yourselves, maybe talk a little bit about how did you get here?
I'll let you go first, Nancy.
Okay, thanks, Roy, for having us. Appreciate it. How we got to Fremont. It's not been a straight line for sure. We're actually Kansas City natives. We're not from Nebraska. Kind of wish we were. We think Kansas City is a great place to visit, but we wouldn't want to live there, which is funny. But we started this journey back in about 1999. Glen was volunteering for our kids' private school, and it wasn't a rich, expensive private school. It was a poor private school.
Yeah.
They didn't have computers. They didn't have internet. This was back probably around 1999. So he volunteered a lot of time, and he even got Volunteer of the Year award once, which is impressive, considering at the time we had 5 children, and he had a full-time job, and he was still able to devote a lot of time to this little school. But that's where the story all begins. I'll let you take it from there.
All right. Well, it has been a long road. We started, like Nancy said, at a little private school in Kansas City called Dominion Christian School. It's no longer in existence. They folded. But that's kind of where the passion and the desire in my heart started. It started as a very small. I've always been a go-getter. I've always climbed the corporate ladder, worked at software companies, developed software for a lot of major Union Pacific, Sprint, H&R Block. So I've been in corporate world for a long time. Got to that point in my career that you realize that corporate world's not the solution. So I was still needing money to feed the kids and stuff, but that's where I was getting my fulfillment, helping schools. And so that's where I started writing a little program called Kiddos back then. It was a web-based, which at that time was revolutionary.
Yeah, it would have been.
It's actually called something else. I can't remember that. ASP, Application Service Provider. But we started writing a web-based application for schools, taking attendance, letting parents log in and register, and it was just for this one little school, and I didn't have much desire, to take it anywhere else. But it really started feeding my need to help. I love to help people, and I love, and so we just kind of started letting God grow that thing however He wanted to.
I think you're missing just an important aspect. of this. You said, and you created this little thing that does attendance, and he was up until 2 a.m. most nights coding this little attendance program, and then going back to work, at 5 a.m. again. So it wasn't as easy as he just glossed it over. It was truly a labor of love. Yeah.
I've always, since we started having kids, I always worked the morning shift, or always wanted to go into work really early, 5 o'clock in the morning, so that I could get off at 2 in the afternoon and be with my kids and help Nancy out. And then that kind of parlayed into, okay, I can now start developing code when the kids go down and that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, Nancy's right. I was burning the candle at both ends for a long time.
For like 15 years.
15 years. There's no candle left. But that's what it took. And so at some point in time, that little idea started sprouting wings to the point where we started talking about, what was the acronym, What If Kiddos?
Oh, so, 5 kids. The acronym was When Kiddos Gets Going. It's like, well, no, we've made it when we can shop at the mall for school clothes and not Walmart or Target. So When Kiddos Gets Going was always the acronym used, yeah.
So I was a senior system architect analyst at Sprint, making buku money, great job, great prestige, but it just wasn't filling my heart. I, over the period of 2 years, left a consulting job, went to work full-time, and then went to work full-time at another company making $72,000 a year.
Yeah, so the consulting job was a 6-figure income.
Yeah.
Then he got that cut in half to go to another job.
And then it was reduced.
And then it was cut in half again.
Reduced more. But it was on purpose. That last move that we made, I had a friend in the business, or a friend in a company, that I told him I needed a job that with benefits, but I didn't need the headache. And so he hired me in as a programmer too. And I was able to do that job with half of my brain tied behind my back.
Yeah.
And then put my other efforts on Sycamore. And so during that 2 years that I was there, I made in my performance reviews nothing but 3s. I didn't overachieve. I just did the minimum amount to get by. But that God had given me that opportunity, and He gave me that friend that gave me a job there that allowed me to start. So we started putting the efforts toward kiddos.
Yeah, kiddos morphed into Sycamore.
It's morphed into Sycamore Education.
So for our listeners, what is Sycamore Education today?
Good. Sycamore today is a web-based online school management system that's been used around the world. We're in 43 countries now. It's web-based, so a lot of smaller schools can afford it, where they can't afford some of the bigger solutions. So that was our niche market. We found that niche market that we could go after. And a lot of it is a Christian or public or parochial schools. We have a lot of schools, or a lot of dioceses throughout the United States. We're into a lot of Christian and missionary schools around around the world. But it really just started taking off. And we were at the point where I was struggling with God, because it's like, what are you doing with this thing? I had a passion in me to be an entrepreneur, but I had 5 kids.
Yeah.
And had a wife and a home, and it's just like... And so we struggled for 2 years there, figuring out what we were supposed to do. I kept putting fleeces out, and we finally decided that this was what we were really supposed to be doing. And so I went to my boss and told him we're quitting. Nancy had been looking at a house here in Fremont for over a year, almost a year.
Yeah.
And she said, God's holding this house for us. And so when we decided to go full-time as an entrepreneur, we moved to Fremont. We'd been living here for 2 years in the early 90s, and decided to come back to Fremont because we loved the small town look, the small town feel.
And part of that, too, is that we had relationships. We had a group of friends here, and we knew if we were going to start something from scratch and we were going to struggle, we needed to be around people that would support us. And that was key in those first years, is to have that familiarity, that support system.
So we moved back, and believe it or not, I look back now, it's like, what were we thinking?
Can I just interject a little bit, just to show God's faithfulness? When we put our house on the market in Kansas City, it was only on the market for about 6 weeks. But the people who purchased the house were brokers, real estate brokers. And they told us about this new loan that was out called an interest-only or a no-doc loan. And if it hadn't been for them purchasing our home, we wouldn't know about that, because when we found this house on the internet that we loved, 100-year-old home, and we came to Fremont and we went to a bank and they said, there is no way you're going to get a loan for a house. You're starting a new company. You have no history. That's when we pulled out that knowledge about the no-doc loans. And interesting enough, we did get that, and it was great. It helped us for a few years until we refinanced. But that is also one of the things that brought down the housing market in 2008.
Yeah.
But we were able to use that to our advantage, and
took advantage of that
and refinance and get on our feet. So that was totally a God thing.
So Sycamore began to emerge and birth. I'm sure you look back on that now and you go, well, it was so simple. It just kind of happened. It just kind of worked itself out.
My memory's better than that.
You probably don't say that now. So maybe where was some of the challenges where you just faced something and you hit something and this is not going to work, right? I don't know what to do, or we call them wicked problems.
Yeah.
But what is something that maybe you could share that where that kind of where you just felt like, I don't know what I'm going to do, and then talk a little bit about how you thought about it, how you then took action in it, and what are some things that you learned out of doing that?
I think there's the complexity on a professional level and on a personal level. Professionally, we were starting a web-based system when. One of the reasons why we named Kiddos is because it had to do with children and Windows. And Windows was a new technology. And, online shopping didn't exist. People did not trust putting information online or on the web. And so our first hurdle was educating educators about the safety and the benefits of being a web-based solution. And that, to get over it, I think was a matter of time. It was about educating people. Our competitors played a part in that. They had the same struggle. They had to educate people. And for that, I think it was just kind of a waiting game, that perseverance, not giving up.
Yeah.
That's the big thing about entrepreneurs is you got to be persistent. Growing this company, like I said, when we moved to Fremont, we had 32 customers making about $30,000 a year, and 5 children and a mortgage.
And had to pay for a server, which may have been in the basement. I don't know.
And so there was some point in time where it was almost embarrassing to tell people that we were taking a risk, because they looked at you differently. They looked at you like, you're crazy. And so,
what do you mean you don't have health insurance?
Yeah, at that time our kids were covered by the state health insurance, and me and Nancy bucked it up. There is a gallbladder
attack
that we ended up
that I suffered for 6 years.
So talk about suffering. That's physically suffering, but I think the real struggle there was persistence. I mean, I knew, I just have a strong belief in God that this was what I was supposed to be doing. Even though I kept referring to Nancy as I'm a Noah out here building an ark, and I look stupid. And a lot of our friends think I look stupid, but I think I'm supposed to be building this thing. And there were talks, me and Nancy would take talks along the...
We'd go for long walks, and I'm in charge of the books at home, and we'd be talking, and I'm like, are you sure you don't want to get a job? And then that question would lead to an argument, and then suddenly I'm standing on the sidewalk in the middle of a busy street crying my eyes out.
Pleading for me to get a job.
Please just get a job. We can't do this anymore.
But there are many times where our faith came in, or what God provided. There was I always love telling this story. It's short. Mays are our toughest month because schools, it's their toughest month.
Right.
And so for us to get money out of a turnip, is hard in May. So we were sitting in the front of May thinking, how are we going to get through this month? We ain't going to get through this month. And we got a phone call from one of our schools in Kansas City that says, Mr. Ellis, we got $2,200 in this account waiting for you to invoice us. Can you invoice us? And we got that invoice out in lightning speed. And me and Nancy just turned in our little office and started bawling because, that was what we needed. It was our mistake that we had made in February that allowed us to get through May.
Wow.
So... there was just times and times after that. I think what I've learned is persistence and just, you just got to have faith in something.
Yeah. So Sycamore began to really blossom.
It did.
Began to really grow, and you became and are now one of the major players in your market. Is that right?
The market has expanded and collapsed and expanded and collapsed, but right now there are just two of us in the market, maybe three in the market now, and we are one of them.
Yeah, we definitely compete with the corporate solutions out there, and many times come out on top.
We have outlasted a lot of the small companies. So,
well, that's a tribute to really setting up systems that will perform as the business and not be dependent upon you, the individual.
Right.
And we talk a lot about that when we talk about navigating complexity. So, what are some of your leadership philosophies that you really embody and try to put into the culture of Sycamore that have led to this success?
I think in the early days it was, attitude of all oars in the water, and you're all going to wear many hats. Because sometimes the marketer was also, doing the billing. But as we grew and we were able to hire people specific to each task, I think some of our attitudes were, one that we learned maybe a little too late was, hire slow, fire fast. When you're a small company, you don't have time or money or resources to waste on people that aren't fulfilling their job duties the way that you need them to be done. So that was part of it.
I tend to show a little too much grace and mercy. Sometimes I keep an employee around way too longer than you should, and if I just want to. I'm a developer, but the strengths, the Gallup strength. I'm a developer, so I always want to encourage people to do better. And in reality, this is a startup company, and there's probably not more time for that when we're trying to make bills.
So, just for our listeners, you have to realize this is a software company, a startup software company, led by a couple entrepreneurs in rural Nebraska.
Yeah.
We're not in San Francisco. We're not in New York. We're not anywhere near really a technology training base. So how did you deal with that? How did you deal with that uncertainty and trying to scale out this company in a place you wanted to live, in a place you wanted to be, you wanted your company to be, but you needed talent around you to help do that?
I'm not sure it's always been to our benefit to be in a small community. I think people didn't take us as seriously, possibly, even just Fremonters in general. If you were a great software company, you'd be in Lincoln or Omaha. So we had to work over that perception.
We're normally a manufacturing and agricultural city, so to bring technology into this little town just didn't fit well with the leaders. They just didn't understand it. So it almost became our mantra that we're going to prove you wrong. And so it was tough because I was the only developer, and we had some salespeople. Nancy was sales team. But I knew I needed more developers. And so my oldest son, Brock, went to college to be a chemistry teacher. And his third year in, called me and said, I don't want to teach chemistry anymore. I said, well, what do you want to do? And he goes, I want to come work for you. And so I said, you got to finish your degree. And so he finished it with some weird degree. But he had programming in his blood. And so the first day he hit the door, he started teaching himself how to code. He loves to be a teacher. And he loves to code. And so you take those two attributes and you put him in an energetic young man, and he started teaching people how to code. And so he is responsible for taking our programming staff from me to him to 10 other people.
Wow.
At one point in time, he had 10 developers underneath him that he had taught how to code. We brought in some people that got laid off, and he ran them through some teaching coding.
A couple kids who didn't really want to go to college,
right
but
out
wanted,
of high school.
wanted to
So it really did help to have Brock there teaching it. And so that's our whole desire. We kind of took that whole idea and said, hey, maybe we got something here. Maybe there's a lot of kids here in rural Nebraska, rural United States that aren't going to college, but they have the skill set to be a programmer.
Yeah. So one of the things Brock did was create a code academy. So it's a summer, like an internship that he offers for free and for no charge for a couple weeks during the summer. And that's really kind of to jump off to current day. That's really the starting point for the Fremont Creative Collective, which is a nonprofit that Glen created for helping entrepreneurship.
So let's maybe dive into the present day and Sycamore. As I said, it's blossomed. It's done well. You're one of the major players, if not the major player in your market. but it's allowed you now to expand your influence, expand your passions into. We're sitting in a building that's what 137 years old, in a downtown that's not always
Vibrant.
looked at as vibrant and good, but here we are. Because this is, for our listeners, this is a unique way of looking at complexity. Because I think when you think about this, you don't think an everyday situation like buying a building in a rural downtown can be complex and wicked, if we call it that.
It was so wicked.
So why don't you set up, why are we in this building
right now? Well, we, like Nancy mentioned just earlier, that I have a strong desire to help people. That's my second strength as developer. And so we've been down this path called entrepreneurship, and I wanted to help other people down the path. My son has a strong passion to teach coders, and so with that all coming into play, we thought, okay, we need an ecosystem here in Fremont. An entrepreneurial ecosystem. Most people in Fremont don't even know what that means, but we did. And so we needed a motor, an engine here that could start generating some power. And so we started looking around, knowing that this vision of having kind of a community center with a coffee shop and a pint room that sells local brew, that's what we needed to start attracting those creative thinkers. Because right now, Fremonters have complained that we have this beautiful college in town, Midland University. 3,000 students come in and out of this college every year, and none of them are landing in Fremont. And so that was our desires, to kind of create this web, create this environment that some of them would start, sticking around and starting up companies. And so that's where we looked for a building. Believe it or not, this building was not for sale when we started going after it. So there was a whole backstory there. But we're sitting in a 137-year-old building at 3-story. We've renovated the first floor to be that community center, to attract the creative people.
So just for our listeners, how big is this building? You said it's 3 stories, but...
Yeah, just under 30,000 square feet.
So it's not small.
Not small at all.
Not small
huge.
at all.
So to put it in perspective, the coffee shop is how many square feet?
5,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Bigger than most homes.
Yeah, so it's not a tradition. It's got a coffee shop that has a stage in it, and we do live music here. The decoration, or how do you call it, the decor, makes people feel comfortable because it's not perfect, it's not pristine, it's not new age or any, what am I trying to say? Modern. Nancy's done an extremely well job of taking the old and the new and putting them together. So we've got a lot of wood on the walls, and that wood came from the 3rd floor. So we tried to keep as much of the materials in the building as we can. We harvested the marble out of the bathrooms on the 2nd floor and made it counters down here on the 1st floor.
They were cleaned very well.
And so that's the start. And when people come in, they're impressed. And this is not the end. We are just doing the very first step in this big plan of creating this ecosystem. We needed a trap. We needed the attraction. We've got it. Now we're starting to have all these creative people come through this building. Now we're going to start putting on programs. We've got plans to extend to the 2nd floor. It was remodeled as 1920 office space. It's been vacated since 1957, so it gives us some great bones to put a whole new entrepreneurial alley up there and ecosystem. So it's Fremont is ripe for this. I always tell people it's good to be a big fish in a small pond than it is to be a small fish in a big pond.
That's true.
And
so the name of the building is the May Brother Building. I think that's a fascinating story, because I would love you to share how the story of how this building was built is so parallel to your own stories.
It's interesting because we have 4 boys and a daughter, so it could have easily been the Ellis brothers plus Amy. I don't know, but it was very important to Glen to acknowledge the people who came here and started their own business as the first entrepreneurs in this building.
I love the history of this building. I'm a history buff. Nancy knows I watch the History Channel majority of the time. But when we bought this building, I started diving into who built it and who they were. And
Now, when you bought it, you had no idea.
no idea, no idea what was the name of the building was not on there. There was no name on the building, so it was
It's just a building,
it
and
was just a building that God led us to, and so we bought it. And I started realizing that this was the May Brothers building. You started seeing pictures, so we decided, we need to put the name back on the building. Freaked everyone out in the community because they didn't have a clue,
Yeah.
what we were doing, but we were taking it back to its original. But then I started doing research on the gentleman, the May Brothers, Joseph T. May, 20 years old, moved here from Ohio on his own, a 20-year-old, to start a grocery store here.
In 1880.
1868.
68.
oh wow,
He moved out here
just
in
after the
1880.
Civil War.
What?
Just after the Civil War.
Just after the Civil War, he moved here by himself. His brother, then another brother, met him out here, and eventually three, and then fourth one came for a while. But these guys were entrepreneurs. They were going to be a grocery store, and then they realized there was more money to be made in being a wholesale. And so they ended up swapping their grocery store into a wholesale, and then they built this beautiful building. And back then, this was the building of the city, 1881, three-story brick. I can't imagine building this building with no electricity, no engineering.
Yeah.
They just did it.
It's fascinating because the bricks on the brick walls on the first floor are 21 inches thick.
Yeah.
Wow.
Layers of brick. But we were doing some renovation and we discovered that there were actually railroad ties in the wall,
Railroad tracks.
that they were using for rebar. So, interesting.
So looking at these individuals and knowing what they went through to start their own company, to build a business that was impacting the community, and then reading that Joseph T. May sold out to his brothers and let his brothers continue to run the store, but he later got involved in banking and the community because he just loved his community and he loved people owning their own homes. So it's almost like it's a wonderful life story.
Yeah.
But I see that same pattern forming here.
Yeah.
137 years. I recently turned my company Sycamore over to my son Brock, so that I could be freed up to do more community-minded stuff to build. I'm very much involved now we're very much involved in the downtown, trying to bring a more vibrant downtown to Fremont. And so, and it's just not the Joseph T. May. It was the next generation or the next family that bought it, which was actually John Petro, which is known in Omaha for cafes, but he had a cafe here, and that guy was an entrepreneur. So that's when we really started thinking that, man, there is entrepreneur blood running through this building. Let's just set this thing back on fire and see what we can do. And so that's where I get excited about is that's already been done in this building.
Yeah.
Let's just bring it back to life, and I think it's starting to get done now.
And the history part of it is very important too. If you consider that the name of our coffee shop is Milady Coffee House, which you would think may not be attracted to some different demographics.
Yeah, so tell the listeners a little bit about that name and that brand.
Sure. So Milady Coffee House is actually historic to back when the May brothers owned the wholesale company. They would have what was called jobbers. So they would get food supplies and items in bulk, and then they would parse them down to individual servings to sell to the public. And one of the things that they did was coffee, and it was called Milady Coffee. So we do have some historic, coffee tins and things like that, but we decided just to keep that historic name and reuse it for the coffee shop.
People freak out because they don't know where that came from, but it all relates back to the May brothers.
I love the mural that you had painted when you walk in here because it almost, in essence, captures this whole story.
It does.
But you don't know it unless you sit down with you
don't.
and
It just
you're
looks like
able to see it and hear the story. And your listeners can hear we do live in a railroad town, but it's okay. But that mural, I think, it's beautiful because it shows the May brothers. It gives us essence of the jobs that were created in this building or the things they did, and brings into today what you're trying to create here in this space. So
it feels like it's come full circle a little bit, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it has. It's that photo is a reproduction of the original photo, but it's a painting that's done in multicolor. So it kind of takes something old and makes it very artistic.
It's
very
vibrant.
new.
It's kind of impressionistic.
Yeah.
Modern. So it's a blend of the modern and the old.
yeah,
Kind of exactly what we're doing with this building.
it is. So this first floor, if you walk in here, you don't know the hard work. You can kind of guess, but you don't really know the hard work that went in to make this space what it is today, which for our listeners, I spend a lot of time in here because I'm a young entrepreneur. Well, not young, but relatively, but I'm young in our entrepreneur journey after a 20-year Army career, and I love coming in here and I feel like I'm one of the people you tried to attract to come in and sit down and be able to collaborate with people. You graciously let me use your conference room to do phone calls and things like that. But tell our listeners a little bit about the challenges you faced just to get this space to be functional, to be able to be occupied, if you will, to even see what I was seeing right now sitting around us in this amazing coffee shop space that you have.
It's a good story, I think.
Well, first, it started off as the building wasn't for sale when we approached the individual. And
we knew that it hadn't been used for anything. You could see through the windows that the upstairs, no lights on. The downstairs, the first floor had been many things. Most recently, it had been a furniture store, a workout facility, and then lastly, been SAS Senator headquarters.
Yeah.
So we knew it had possibilities, it had potential. It definitely had potential.
But when we first bought it, we were so naive. We did not have a clue what was in front of us. We just had a vision. And that vision started to play out as we started to peel away the layer and layer and layer of stuff in this building.
Literally stuff, right?
Literally. We literally, there's one wall here I like to show people. We put 4 windows back in, they were bricked in. But before we could get even to that, we took 9 tons of crap off of that wall, which was like 4 layers of sheetrock and plywood and that stuff had to come off and then be hauled out. So there was 10, 11 dumpsters of stuff coming out of this building.
I'm going to throw out a shout out to our second son, Bradley. He spent 2 years in this building with no heat, no air conditioning, just deconstructing things, taking things down, taking things out, hauling plywood to the 3rd floor. He broke his back on a weekly basis.
So just for our listeners, you didn't hire any of this kind of out to a big contractor, come in, gut the building, and do all this.
That would have been the smart way, but the more expensive way.
True, but so in true entrepreneurial fashion, you rolled your sleeves up.
I did.
Oh my gosh!
Dug into the problem and the mess. And
there's a good story about that. You were talking about the windows and putting the windows back in. So we knew that we needed light in the coffee shop, and there were no windows, so we were going to put these bricked up windows back in place. So we purchased the windows, and then we did contract a contractor to put a window back in for us. He had no fewer than 4 different individuals coming out to work on that one window. Somebody to caulk, somebody to paint. That one window, not including the price of the window, was $4,500 in labor.
Ooh, wow.
So Glen, being the entrepreneur he is, no obstacles too big, he YouTubed how to do this. They, with the help of our son and his nephew, they actually removed the brick where the windows needed to go out. We have some video where they got a saw and they sawed out the opening for the window and then they pushed it. And it fell all over the street on the other side. And we were so naive. We were like, it'll just fall down. No, it splattered like into the street. We didn't think to have cones up or anything. So you just do it, right?
Yeah. You just do it.
So he YouTubed how to lay bricks so he could finish the trim around it, and they look great. You can't tell the difference. It's just
now take it. These walls are 18 inches wide, so that's a lot of brick that we were cutting out. But that's something that I personally had to overcome myself. I'm a CEO of a software company. What the heck am I doing down here shoveling,
bricks out of the
shoveling brick,
street.
And so that was sometimes hard for me to overcome because I was trying to put on this persona in the community that I was a growing entrepreneur, then that I was growing the software company. But I also was a guy that was like, I got to get down and do the work.
Most of the time he walked around in, Duluth trading pants that are super rugged, and they were always dirty. And I'm like, honey, you're going to the store, you really got to change your pants.
She'd come in at noon and say, you really need to change those pants. Like, these were brand new. I put them on this morning.
I'm like, I'm not done with them yet.
So that was, the physical labor was good, and we did it. But overcoming that obstacle of trying to have this persona of being a professional man was hard for me. And so, but I did it. It's like, I either going to have to pay somebody, and this is going to be ridiculously expensive to do, or I'm going to do it myself, and we're going to get by and get it done.
And this is just kind of, I think, the attitude entrepreneurs have. Glen will mow the lawn in the summertime, and there's a financial planner that lives down the street. And several times he stopped and said, shouldn't you be paying somebody to do that? And I'm thinking, as a financial planner, should you be advising me to spend my money that way? But Glen, that's just Glen. That's the entrepreneur. You get out there, you do it yourself if it's going to save some money.
Yeah.
Now, the sense that, we do pay people to do things, and it's municipal code that I can't run the wiring, which I'm fully capable of doing, but I can't because I'm not licensed. So we ended up taking a small loan out to get some of the stuff done and get it done, because we had the building for about 2.5 years of just gutting, cleaning, getting this thing ready, and then we turned the spigot on and brought in construction guys and came in and did the heating, the cooling, and within 4 months we were open.
So you're opening the building, and what's going through your mind right now when you say, I'm going to open the building and put a coffee shop in?
This is another good story.
Because I know you had a vision for this, but
right.
it just kind of emerged.
You would think, right?
Yeah.
That's what it looks like from afar. So we had somebody pegged to run the coffee shop for us. I'd only been drinking coffee for about 5 years. Glen doesn't drink coffee to this day. So we had somebody who had experience, and we wanted him to come in and run it. But when we got down to the details, and we should have discussed it sooner, but our noses were to the grindstone getting the building open. We just didn't agree on a lot of things. One thing, he didn't feel there was a need to be open after 4 because people don't drink coffee after 4. And we're like, well, we want this to be a community space. We want set hours. We want it to be open for people to gather, for students to study. And so there were just a couple things we didn't see eye to eye. And it's like, okay, now what do we do? This is, February. We wanted to be open by summer. So we approached a local coffee chain. She thought about it and thought about it and thought about it, and then came back and said no, that she didn't want to incur the extra franchise fee for another location. So, third plan, we approached Aroma's Coffee in Omaha. They have 3 locations. And again, I was a new coffee drinker, but I knew I loved their coffee. So we contacted the owner, who was also an entrepreneur, of course, and she said, it's just not a good time for me, but if you need anything, let me know. So we just put that in the back of our brain. It's like, okay, we're going to do this ourselves then. So I would stay up way past midnight looking at Pinterest. I search coffee house, and then I'll zoom in and see what kind of equipment they have. Where was it located? Just getting all of those things down. And then I'd run it by, Autumn Pruitt at Aromas, and she would say, that's not a real good price for that piece. Let me show you where else you could buy it. So she was kind of a sounding board for a while. And we got all set up, and we looked at each other and we just kind of said, how do we make coffee? So again, we called Autumn and we said, we don't know what we're doing. Can you help us? And by golly, she sent a team up to train our baristas the entire day on what's the difference between a latte and a cappuccino. How do you do this? What is good tea? And then she took us a step forward, further. She brought her manual with us, with her. She gave us all of her documentation on how to make the drinks, what goes into them, how to clean an espresso machine. She was super invaluable to our success, and we wouldn't be here today without her. So our relationship with her has continued. Her name is now Hardy Coffee Company, and she has a bakery, and she has a roaster. So we get our coffee beans from her, which is fantastic because she's pretty local. It means the coffee beans are roasted and in your cup usually within less than 10 days, which you really can't, you can't claim that if you're a Starbucks or Scooters. And so it makes us unique. It makes our coffee really delicious. And then we also get some baked items from her bakery as well.
At the end of the day, this wasn't our desire. We didn't want to run a coffee shop. We wanted somebody else to run it for us. But we realized as a good entrepreneur that in order to do it the right way that we wanted to, we're going to have to. Luckily we had another child in the wings.
Yeah.
Amy was going to school for another trade and decided she wanted to shift gears and get into hospitality, and so she came home that summer and started running a coffee shop for us. And
she got to the point where it was literally she had to be back to school in a month, and she said, I need to talk to you guys. I could go back to school.
Is that a conversation most parents want to have with their 20-year-old.
I know, right? She said, I can go back to school for 2 more years and incur $40,000 in debt, or I can stay home and run the coffee shop, which is probably what I will do after school anyway. So, we were kind of in need of somebody to run it as well. And she's done a fantastic job. She's great at our social media. She's great at management, at organizing meetings, and she's really been a godsend for that.
That's awesome. So the space it's really flourished, I think. And just from somebody who comes in regularly, it's a place I love to invite people, You've even allowed us to host some company events here, which has just been fantastic. But this isn't everything in your passion and your vision. You have this heart for restoring our community. Unpack that a little bit for our listeners and maybe set it up with what is, in your view, what is Fremont as a community, and where is your heart then led to this idea of restoring community?
So we, in the process of building or restoring this building, had to be involved in quite a few decisions and activist things that were going on in downtown, and we're trying to, kind of help lead the downtown area, and then soon realized that there were no leaders downtown. I mean, there's some people that were trying or whatever, but there were just no vision, no anybody that had any foresight in what we wanted our downtown to be.
And so for our listeners, Fremont is a town of about 25,000 people.
Just outside of Omaha.
Yeah, about 30 miles outside of Omaha. So there is a definite break between a metropolitan of Omaha and where we live here. And it's a very somewhat industrial community.
Yeah, like I said earlier, it's more of an agriculture, manufacturing. And there's some groups in town that, embrace that. And I embrace it too. There's nothing wrong with it. It was what we were trying to do is say, but there can be more. Mm-hmm. We could add technology. So many other small towns are adding technology. And so that's where we started to see some of the real difficulties in the city government of small towns. Mm-hmm. Fremont's not unlike any other unique town. It's been run the way it's been run for a long time, and there needs to be change, but people are resistant to change, and so sometimes we're going off of there's no laws or regulations. It's just, I heard this so many times, well, that's just the way we've always done it. Mm-hmm. It's like, that may not be the best way, or it doesn't mean we can't do it another way, but it's just the way we've always done it. And so that didn't sit well with me. Mm-hmm. And so when we started hitting these roadblocks, and then we started, that Fremont, anyone can Google Fremont and see that we've had some ugly past. Mm-hmm. It's got a reputation for its immigration ordinance that was adopted 8 years ago or something like that, and it's put a black eye on our community. There's been some other things that have caused Fremont to be shown in the light in not the best view, and so all I want is for Fremont to be its best. Mm-hmm. And so to get past some of those issues, because we are a good town. We're like just any other town in the Midwest. We got good, strong people living here, loving people. Sometimes you get casted by a couple of people or a movement that happens because they're upset with their government, and mm-hmm. so it just takes the city in a different direction. And that's what I started seeing, was that our city government wasn't open to listening to its citizens. Mm. And so I think because of that resistance, the citizens felt they wanted to have some control of something. And so they started, almost like a kid, started acting up. And so started doing things. I'm not sure I'm making the right metaphors here, but there was just some poor leadership in this community that took us down this path. And so that's when I decided that maybe I need to run for city council, and because I wanted change. And so another movement, me and Nancy are always looking for solutions. Another movement that we're implementing right now in Fremont is a program called Community Heart and Soul. Yeah,
so I love that idea. You've activated somewhat on the government side, but this is not a government thing at all. No, this is
purely a relationship, a relational community program that's really meant to be to bring everyone together. The 3 pillars are include everyone, play the long game, and focus on what matters most. And so how do you figure out what matters most?
So, if you're dealing any kind of uncertainty or complexity, those are three big pillars you could
Apply
to any situation in your life that you or organization.
Yeah.
So repeat those again for us.
It's and we've kind of it's the Community Heart and Soul is a nation program. It was birthed out of Vermont, but the three pillars are include everyone. So that's a lot of work, because you got to make sure that you put the effort towards trying to include everyone in your community.
Yeah.
Even those that don't want to be included because they're frustrated with the way things are going, you need to reach out to them. Mm-hmm. Play the long game. Don't make decisions for the short term. Mm-hmm. You need to be looking at your grandchildren and your great grandchildren, and then include everyone, play the long game, and focus on what matters most. And the way to do that is when you're trying to include everyone, you need to ask them what matters most to you. What do we as a city want to be known as? What do we want to do? How do we want to be recognized from the outside?
It really gives a a voice back to the people, because they get to participate in the planning for the city by telling the leadership what matters most to them, what they loved about the town in the past, what they like about it now, and where they'd like to see it go in the future. And then the hope is that that is adopted at a city level, and those become the goals, the
pillars, or
yeah. So for our listeners, Glen just mentioned he ran and was subsequently elected to city council, but there were others in the community who shared this passion and vision, and you actually ran on a platform.
We did.
As a group of candidates to bring about a transition or a change to the community.
It was at the same time we had thrown our head into the ring for city council. We were pushing this motion or this movement called Community Heart and Soul, and so we were fighting because we didn't want to muddy the community heart and soul up with politics, but we knew that the three candidates that were running to unseat incumbents all believed in this community heart and soul. And so we kind of put the community heart and soul on pause. But we united as three candidates. Uh-huh. We had the same signs. We had the same slogan, restoring community. That's kind of what we wanted. And some people took offense to that. It's like, well, we have community. It's like, well, we just want to. So that's so with that, we had three candidates that were seated last night. With all of the same passion as far as we want the city, the citizens of Fremont to be heard. Mm-hmm. And we got our work cut out for us, because there's a lot of cynical people out there now because of the past, mm-hmm. that we have to work through the process of healing and letting them know that we want them to be heard. And mm-hmm. so that's what this Community Heart Soul program is going to help us do. It's a 2-year program. I mean, it's just not going to get fixed overnight.
Right.
So it's a dedicated program. So anything else I'm missing there?
I don't think so. I think, the goal is just to let the people be heard. And some of that was in the city council meeting last night. There was a resolution voted on to give the public comment time during the city council meetings. So the progress and the process of the succeeding has already begun.
Well, that's great. I always like to I'm going to transition just a little bit. I always like to ask this of our guests. And that's because hopefully people are listening to this because they're interested in this whole idea of complexity and this whole idea that things aren't always black and white. Things aren't always very structured. Things can be very unstructured, and we don't always know the right answers. So I always like to ask, if based on your experience, based on the things that you've accomplished or things you've learned through failure even, what advice would you give someone who's facing something that just seems so unsolvable?
Join a support group.
Well, I mean, there's some truth to that.
Yeah. I think, part of it is the persistence of not giving up, to look for the positive. Glen is a very positive person. I like to think I'm realistic. One of my strengths is being deliberative, which isn't always a good thing for entrepreneurship. It means I look at all the possibilities and figure out what could go wrong with each possibility so that you can figure out which one works the best. But the entrepreneur spirit is to just go. You just do, and then you figure it out as you go. So
I've been told that I've been kind of a risk taker,
it's a risk
but
taker.
I don't take stupid risks. So I mitigate the risks a lot. I talk to myself. I talk to Nancy. So we are risk takers. So you have to take risk in order to advance, right? I mean, if you're going to sit in your square or your comfort zone, you're never going to get out. So I'm a true believer in taking risks. You just got to mitigate them. Make sure that there is something. And like you said, you got to make sure that when you take that step, if you're going to fail, don't give up. You just pivot and do something else. And so my son gave me some advice going into my first city council meeting. I think it's apropos here. He said, stay the course. Because I kind of told my family, it's like, hey, this is my first city council. I'm a little nervous. I know it's going to be intimidating. And my oldest son, Brock, said, stay the course. Speak truth. Don't be afraid of standing up for yourself. You got this, Dad, praying for you. So...
Wow, that's awesome. As a father, I bet you're just super proud of that.
Yeah.
That's coming back to you.
Coming back to me, and so sometimes I know he's wiser than me in that areas. And so, stay the course, speak the truth, and stand up for yourself. And sometimes as us, wanting to be humble individuals, it's hard to sometimes do that. And so that's what I need to learn, that you still can be humble, but also stick up for yourself.
We in my former profession as a military professional, we used to always preach that you move into a situation, especially in the conflicts that I fought into, with this sense of humility, because you're moving into a place of you don't know the community, you don't know the people, and you're there to do a mission and do a job, but you need to approach it with this kind of attitude of humility around who's there, who's been there before, and what they're doing. So I think that's great. I think for our listeners, that advice could carry to any situation you're facing. There's some validity to staying the course, and there's definitely, you do want to speak the truth, and sometimes speaking the truth is hard, especially when you're in an organization where you might not be the leader of it, but you're speaking a truth that the leader needs to hear, or the organization needs to hear, and they may not want to hear it. And I think that's a great piece of advice. In navigating complexity, sometimes it takes that seed of truth to then begin to build out solutions to that. So, any closing thoughts that you'd like to share? Well, before I do that, I want to ask. I like to ask this. Do you have a favorite book that you always recommend to people?
I'm not a big reader, so I don't read a lot of books.
Or maybe a TED Talk.
Well, no, that's kind of what I was getting at. I don't read, but I actually read a lot throughout the day. I'm reading articles. I'm reading, that kind of stuff. But one thing I rest my head on a lot is I love Rick Warren. I love reading his books, and I love listening to his sermons. So that's what I would.
Okay.
It's like your daily encouragement.
Yeah.
What about you, Nancy?
What?
Your daily encouragement.
Daily encouragement. Yeah.
Yeah, don't ask me that question.
No, don't ask me that question. Okay. I won't ask you that question then. Well, thank you both for just taking the time to sit down with me. I love to hear this story. I wish our listeners could actually see this. Visualize it. I mean, just hearing, we don't have time to do it on this episode, but having you do the tour of the building and talk about the vision of what you're trying to create, because this is just the beginning.
It is. It's what I tell people. This is just the start. We got 2 more floors, and
it's a bigger picture too. It's all about the entire downtown, and then it flows out to the entire city. So
yeah. So for our listeners, if you'd like to know more about what is happening here in Fremont, and specifically with Milady or the May Brothers building, Glenn, where can they reach out to them?
A couple of websites I want to give you. SycamoreEducation.com. That's my company, software company. We have MayBrothersBuilding.com. That'll kind of show you everything that's going on in the building, kind of give you an essence of what it's all about. There you'll see the My Lady, you'll see the Pioneer Stage, you'll see the 1881 Pint Room. And then we've got another website called historicdowntownfremont.com. That's going to let you see our downtown and what we're working on, and that's kind of new. And then we got FremontCreativeCollective.org. That's our nonprofit.
Yeah.
And then we have another nonprofit, but it's probably going to be behind the scenes, called the Fremont Downtown Development Group. So.
And if they want to reach out individually to you, where could they reach to you?
I'll give you a cell phone number.
Glen at maybrothersbuilding.com. It's with one N, Glen.
Okay.
Or Nancy at maybrothersbuilding.com.
Awesome. And so also for our listeners, this podcast, we're bringing this to you from Genosco Consulting. If you are dealing with a complex challenge in your business or organization, we'd be glad to sit down and talk with you about how you can navigate that. And you can find us at genosco.co. This podcast, The Art of Complexity, you find us on the web at theartofcomplexity.com. You can also find us on any social media at The Art of Complexity. If you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to host at artofcomplexity.com. It's been great having both of you here. I really appreciate your time and just the willingness to sit down and share your story. It's a different story, but maybe not so different for people who can relate to just being in uncertain situations and then learning how to navigate those. So thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
All right.
It's been great.
We'll talk to you next week on The Art of Complexity.